let's go ahead and get started. Thanks a lot for coming to this important panel discussion. My name is Ryan Hubbard. I'm part of the Pluralism, Engagement, and Accessibility Committee. And for the past 4 years, we've been helping to put on this panel. There is a sign-in sheet going around, so be sure to sign into that so we can record our attendance to this event. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Laurie Lawrence, who did most of the legwork in putting this together. So thanks a lot, Laurie, for helping with this.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. I am Dr. Lawrence. I actually am just right across the street from you over there at Florida State University, and then I also serve as the co-chair for the 14th Circuit Human Trafficking Task Force. And so every year we do this panel, we try to pick a different topic related to human trafficking, and this year decided to sort of focus on sextortion since it's kind of been a hot topic of talk lately. I actually want to show you real quickly a clip, okay, that was done by a CBS affiliate out of Alabama, sort of give you a little insight into some of this. It is a few years old, so we're actually going to update some of the information here today. And then I'll go ahead and have our panelists introduce themselves, if that's okay.
And with that, tonight we continue our investigative series, From Fear to Freedom, Human Trafficking in Alabama. With this, 70% of trafficking begins online. CBS 42 Morning News anchor Alyssa Rothermick found when it comes to victims, trafficking often starts with one of the most commonly used social media sites.
The number of ads for sex in a given year in our state is 641,000, according to the University of Alabama. As the internet has become more widely available, the business of trafficking has gone from the corners of city streets to being accessible anywhere.
Just about every type of human trafficking that exists throughout the world is happening to some degree and at some level here in our state.
Chris Lim is a professor at the University of Alabama. His department researches sex trafficking and its shift from a traditional in-person arrangement to an online establishment.
It's more mobile, if you will. They could take their victim to any community and pop up an ad in that local community. Another reason is that it's safer for them.
The website Backpage used to be a hotspot for sex ads. The federal government shut the site down in 2018, and now dozens of other sites have popped up in its place. But the ease of internet advertising isn't the only trafficking danger that lurks online. Those who work with victims say traffickers use social media as a place to prey on unsuspecting victims.
I've seen several young ladies who were beginning to get caught or were fully caught in this from really well-established, healthy families from right here over the mountain.
Malia Stevens is part of a group pushing a resolution in the U.S. House to require apps be regulated and rated like movies. Right now, ratings for apps are assigned by the app creators, meaning those potentially dangerous for young adults could be labeled as age appropriate, including one found on most teens' smartphones.
You do have to be 12 years old to use the app.
When it comes to children, we find that Instagram is the main access point for traffickers to groom young underage minors for trafficking.
It's not just Instagram. Traffickers use messaging on Facebook and YouTube too. Several of the experts I talked to agreed that if your child has an online presence of any kind, they've likely been seen by a child predator at least once. They say it's important to guard their online activity.
This is something that requires everybody to work together collaboratively in order to effectively address the issue.
Of the 3 survivors I talked to throughout the course of this investigation, not one was familiar with trafficking before she fell victim herself. So what are Alabama schools doing to educate young people on these potential dangers? More on that tonight at 6. In Birmingham, Alyssa Rothermick, CBS 42 News, local coverage you can count on. And Alyssa has special reports in all of our newscasts today. You can see the ones from earlier today by going right now to...
I'll just leave it at that. That gives you a little bit of insight into what we'll be talking about today, which is sextortion, basically the exploitation of illicit photos online. You can see we have 4 panelists here, and I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic down, and if you would tell everybody who you are and a brief background.
Hello, I'm Dr. Adam Golob. My background is in general human trafficking. I've been studying it for about 10 years, and I've got 2 books and several articles. Specifically, I focus on more of a global and regional perspective, but I'm happy to be here and part of the panel today. I'm an instructor here, assistant professor in political science at Gulf Coast.
Hi, my name is Nicole Rice. I've been involved with Lavish Ministries for 10 years. I started it in 2014, so I'm the executive director. We work with adult survivors of human trafficking and sexual exploitation right here in the Panhandle of Florida.
Hi, I'm Cheri Crim. I am one of the founders of the LGBTQ Center of Bay County, which is now the Gulf Coast LGBTQ Center, and I am also on the Human Trafficking Task Force here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marina Anderson. I am with the Department of Children and Families. I'm the Human Trafficking Prevention Coordinator for Northeast and Northwest Region.
Probably easier if I just stand closer to you. So I'll hand the mic to whoever wants it. Can somebody basically explain what sextortion entails and how it's involved through social media?
So sextortion is a form of online exploitation where the person, the sextorter, is going to be soliciting photos, using those photos against the person, whether it's a young person, an older person. Really, it doesn't have any race or gender or socioeconomic meaning. We've seen people be targeted for sextortion from our military, police officers, firefighters, children, older adults, grandparents. It really is across the board. So I'm excited to see a lot of young people here today because unfortunately you're in one of the highest vulnerable groups. So oftentimes they may even hack into your Snapchat rolls, which is a really common technique that they're using right now. Get a picture that you wouldn't normally want out there, send it back to you. So they have this picture. If you do not send more explicit pictures to them, then they are going to post those pictures that they have on your social media rolls. So that's very common. A lot of times they'll approach online through social media, whether it's TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, as you heard here, and make that connection, a friendship connection. Gaming systems, online gaming is another huge platform that they'll use to befriend you, pick that vulnerability, have those conversations, become a friend, maybe a romantic partner, start picture sharing, and then using those pictures and images against you. Again, we've had them say they're threatened to send it to your parents, send it to your faith-based leaders. I mean, you name it, they will do whatever they can to manipulate you to continue to send those images. And unfortunately, oftentimes they'll keep saying, if you send me more, I'll stop, and they don't. I mean, these cases can go on for years before a person will actually disclose what's actually happening.
Well, since you brought up cases, do you mind talking about any legislation that's in place or coming into place?
Yes. We have federal and state legislation that's against sextortion or online exploitation. And each year there's usually legislation that's passed that kind of beefs up that legislation to make the penalties higher. You know, it's ever evolving, right? We're always playing catch up. And now we have a lot of the AI apps that are out there. There's a lot of things that can happen. There's apps out there that you can actually run anyone's picture in this room in. We're all fully clothed here, and it removes your clothing. So that's used a lot for cyberbullying, especially in middle school and high schools, when the photo's actually not a nude photo of them, but, you know, obviously their peers don't know that. So there's definitely legislation that's passed every single year that beefs up those penalties. But you also have to understand, whenever you give yourself access, give kids access to this, it's a World Wide Web, right? So a lot of times the sex orders are not even in the United States. So they could be, you know, in another country, which is a whole nother issue when you call to the legality of that, right? To try to prosecute someone that's not actually a citizen.
Okay, thank you. I know you still have the microphone, but I'm going to kind of mirror off of that. And obviously, you know, international borders create a challenge. What other challenges are there? You know, typically there's always been great challenges in convicting traffickers, which is why a lot of times we'll see, you know, a laundry list of other charges because we know we can get them on lewd, lascivious, and all these others, and trafficking is difficult. Kind of taking it to the next level when you're dealing with social media, how is that played into?
So I guess in one way, when you have a digital footprint, a lot of times we can backtrack that digital footprint, so we're not having to have a victim testify because you have all that information, right? You're doing the phone imagery or the social media imagery, getting all that information. So in that aspect, it's been very helpful with us not having to put a victim through the trauma of going through a trial. A lot of times people, and especially when I'm in panels or when I'm doing discussions or trainings, people always ask, well, why aren't we seeing a higher rate of human trafficking arrest? And you have to understand, law enforcement is doing a great job. Our federal partners, our state partners, and our local partners are doing a great job to combat this issue. But they're probably not being arrested for a human trafficking charge. They're probably getting arrested maybe for an online exploitation charge, or like you said, a lewd and lascivious, or possession of child pornography. And a lot of those that have the minimum mandatory sentencing that is actually more than what a human trafficking charge would be. And you know, we're all about getting more bang for your buck, right? If I can get someone off the street for 25 to life on a charge for an online exploitation or a sexual battery, I'm going to say go with that charge. Don't worry about the HT charge, because I want them to get the maximum penalty possible. So, and I think that sometimes when stats, when people ask for data or stats, sometimes it gets very skewed, because you're looking for how many human trafficking arrests did we have in Bay County. Well, you're going to see very low. But when you start really filtering down the other charges, because maybe it was a 3-strike drug charge, well, that's going to hold a higher penalty, right? So it may be a different charge. So really, really, really filter that information when you're gathering data, and not just focusing strictly on an HT charge.
Passing the mic around is fun. So if you don't mind, I'm actually going to come over here, since you know, I know you look more holistically, right, internationally in human trafficking. Can you speak to how human trafficking, how the U.S. compares to human trafficking being combated globally?
Yeah, sure. So it's been a pretty difficult run the last 20-some years, ever since trafficking's been sort of on the forefront of getting something that is viable to compare. And for the first several years, the only comparison that we had was the Trafficking in Persons report that the United States puts out, which, as I always tell my students, is a little biased, because we've always ranked tier 1, we're the best, right? But we also put out the report. So the last couple of years, there have been some other entities that have popped up, like the Anti-Slavery International. The United Nations has started doing a couple of publications. And so, you know, it's a hidden crime, so it's really hard to have actual data. But some of the things that I wanted to point out is, right now, if you look at the estimates of number of individuals who have been or are potentially being trafficked in one manner or another, we're looking at about 1 million people in the United States, which puts us one step down from Bangladesh, which tells me that either Bangladesh is doing a really great job or the United States isn't doing so hot. And so when you look at other countries, we rank, we are the 30th country in the world. So that kind of puts us at the bottom rung of developed countries. We're the 122nd out of 160 when it comes to how bad is trafficking. What else here? Also, as you mentioned already, prosecuting trafficking is kind of hard. And if you look at actual cases of trafficking, the estimates versus the prosecutions, we have a crime clearance percentage of about 6% when it comes to trafficking overall in the United States. Which is really, really low. Vehicle theft is at 12%, murder is 55%. So when you look at how we're doing with this crime as compared to others, it's not overly encouraging. But again, that doesn't mean we're not catching the bad guys. It just means that understanding and prosecuting through trafficking is a little bit hard to do.
Thank you. So we kind of have an idea of what sextortion and human trafficking is. We talked a lot about the challenges. Can anybody speak to me about victim services, right? What are we doing to assist victims and identify them?
Sure. So we work with adult survivors of trafficking. So oftentimes when you see a movie about human trafficking or see things about human trafficking in the media, it's oftentimes just about juveniles. Oftentimes it's a white juvenile female is kind of what we see. But as Marina said, you know, human trafficking, sextortion, it knows no gender, it knows no age, it knows no race or socioeconomic status. It can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. And so we actually have a mentoring program. It's called the DREAM program. And it's for women who have survived human trafficking or sexual exploitation or sextortion to come through this program and dream again for their lives. Because oftentimes, the adult victims that we see, the sexual exploitation started way before their adulthood. It started when they were a child and they were sexually abused by a family member or by a boyfriend or by a coach or a teacher or a pastor. And I was talking to an attorney over here, and he made a great point, and it's something I've echoed as well over the years. It's that no one, as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, dreams of becoming a prostitute. You know, that doesn't exist. And so something happens along the way that, whether it's survival sex or poverty or sexual abuse or whatever the case may be, leads them into this lifestyle, and all of a sudden they wake up one day and they're trapped by this trafficker or by this exploiter or this abuser, and they see no way out. They may not be physically bound, but they're psychologically enslaved to that other human. And so victim services, we offer support groups, we offer mentorship, we also work alongside law enforcement. So if law enforcement does a sting or some type of operation and they acquire adult victims of trafficking, we work with them to relocate those victims.
Okay, thank you. So what can the community do? What can the people here do?
So I know that Laurie was there when we heard Sean over at the Florida Department of Health say this. Who remembers being told not to get into the white van, stranger danger, all of those things, right? Raise your hand. This is the white van now. You are carrying it around with you, and we're handing it to our children. And so when we're doing these things, it becomes really important to understand what happens with this and understanding how can you tell if somebody's going to be fake or not. There are some signs that you can look for on those things. And one thing I do want to put out there for parents, Thorn has a great guide that's available. It's called The Safe Connections, a guide to protecting your child from online grooming. And if you guys, it's a free download, absolutely amazing, but it walks you through how the process works. And if we know how the process works, then we can help others understand as well. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, I know we talked about online, but within the LGBTQ community, a lot happens on dating applications. And that's something you don't think about, right? You're out on your Tinder, on your Match, whatever it may be. But they are also out there on your dating apps. And we get a lot of people within the community that may not already be out. And you can imagine the type of scenario that happens when you're not out, and all of a sudden, you know, they're threatening to out you for your sexuality, that you're LGBTQ. So over in the LGBTQ Center here, we have a mental health care grant that we got from the St. Joe Foundation. And so we're trying to help on our side if we do have somebody, of course, reporting where we need to, but to help people go talk to somebody. Because you may not even realize you're being trafficked without talking with somebody.
Actually, if you don't mind circling back, or do you want to answer that, Marina?
I was just going to add, NetSmart is another program that it's age appropriate, and they have different levels of training and access based on the age of that particular child and young adult. So that's another one. That's ran through NITMIC, or National Missing and Exploited Children, on their website as well.
So I want to circle back, and any one of you here can answer this probably. Cheri, you mentioned a term that we are familiar with, but would someone explain what grooming is to those here?
Okay, so grooming. Grooming is when someone becomes, I like to say, the hero of your story. So say we have a woman who, say she has 2 kids, you know, she is shopping in the grocery store, ends up meeting this guy in aisle 4, and he starts charming her and talking to her, asks for her phone number. Yeah, I'm going to give you my phone number. You're very handsome. You're cute. Yes, absolutely. Develops a relationship, develops trust, a rapport. And all of a sudden, this person, you know, hey, you know, I noticed that, you know, your shoes, when was the last time you bought a new pair of shoes? I know you're so busy providing for your kids and working your job and all of these things. So I would love to buy you like a pair of Gucci shoes. I'm just going to go out for you because you're worth it. You're a single mom. Like, I just want to help. And then the next week, oh, I filled up your tank with gas. Your car was low on gas. I filled it up, and I've stocked your entire refrigerator and pantry with all, groceries. I know your kids really like Kraft mac and cheese, so I bought some Kraft mac and cheese for them. Just meeting all of these needs, right? And usually the grooming process, those gifts become more and more extravagant and more big until one day this groomer says, oh, we'll call her Ashley. Oh, Ashley, you remember all those times where I filled up your tank in your car with gas, and how I paid for the doctor's visit for your oldest son, and when I filled up your refrigerator and freezer and pantry with groceries all those times, and when I bought your kids school supplies, and I paid for you to get your hair done, and I bought you that Gucci bag. Well, now you owe me, and I've booked 5 appointments with 5 men for you, and you're going to go sleep with them and have sex, get their money, and you're going to pay me back for everything that I gave to you. So by my calculations, you owe me about $10,000, and this is how you're going to get it. By that point, this victim is often so in love with that groomer, with that abuser or trafficker, because they were the hero of their story. When I didn't have food to feed my kids, he was there, or she was there. When I didn't have enough money to put gas in my car, they were there for me. And so it's just this grooming, the groomer will look for a vulnerability and then try to fill that need however they can, get you to fall in love with me, and then ultimately exploit that for their benefit.
So the other terminology you'll often hear is Romeo pimp, right? Yes, debt bondage. So these are terms that we're all very familiar with, but when I heard Cheri mention grooming, I wanted to kind of provide some clarity for you on that. So how can individuals protect themselves? I mean, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but let's give some real insight into anybody that wants to speak. Okay.
Number one, making sure any social media outlet you have your settings set as private. Do not follow, friend, anyone that you do not know. And I know sitting in this room, many of us are on TikTok. I like TikTok also, but you have to be so careful on a lot of these influencers that you think maybe you're just doing makeup advice or whatever and end up being something completely different. So you have to be very, very careful, making sure that, and if you meet someone on one site and then they're friending you on another, you need to be careful. They're looking for you. They're searching you out. So what's that reason? That's another red flag. Having you go from, regular messaging into a private messaging, or either wanting to send you some other type of device to be able to communicate on, another big red flag for you there that something could be happening. Asking a lot of personal information that really has nothing to do with whatever you're communicating about, especially on gaming systems. And a lot of times when people are playing games, they're not really paying attention to what's actually being asked of them. They're paying attention to the game. So a lot of times, especially kids, they're really, really loose-lipped on giving information that has nothing to do with it. But again, like Nicole said, they have to do these things because they're trying to they're master manipulators, right? So they're trying to find your vulnerability. Everyone in this room has a vulnerability. It probably looks a little bit different than what it did when you were 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. But we still have them. So they're trying to talk to you, communicate with you, befriend you to find that vulnerability. And guess what? Like she said, they're going to be whatever they need you to be. If you want a romantic partner, that's who they're going to be. If you need a parent figure, that's who they're going to be. A romantic partner, that's who they're going to be. Hey, just someone to listen to them, that's who they're going to be, right? So just be very, very careful with social media. Putting pictures out there, you have to be very careful. You have to understand you might be sending a picture to a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or what have you on Snapchat, and then next thing you know, that picture's out. Every picture you post, you have to assume that it may some way find its way into a public view, no matter what you're putting it on. You guys, many of you guys are college age. You're going to be going on to grad school, going on to professions, and guess what? You have that resume, and it looks great. You look like a little shiny penny. And guess who? They got these recruiters out there that's working for the schools and for agencies and professions that's looking at what's the real person look like. My son graduated from FSU. He's in grad school, and he had to give all his social media outlets so they could go review, what are you really like? Who are you? Because the paper says one thing, but what do you really like, right? And I don't know, some of you might be FSU students, but you know, they love to throw you in the fountain when you turn 21, and that came back. They questioned him on his grad application on that. Yeah. So you never know what, some pictures could come back and bite you later. No, thank God social media went around when I was in college. But you do have to be very, very careful.
We have worked with numerous women over the years who they were at some point trafficked or in the sex industry, and they did have naked photos or half-naked photos of them out there in the world. And when they're coming through our program, they want to leave that lifestyle behind, leave that abuser, leave that industry, and get a new job. There's a huge barrier there for employment. So what is a woman supposed to do who comes to me, says, I want to change my life, I want true freedom and restoration, I want to leave that life behind, and okay, first thing we got to do is let's get you a job, let's get you stabilized, and no one will hire them. So how easy and tempting would it be to just go right back to the street, you know?
I'd also like to add, like, when you asked how to keep yourself safe, right? I think it's also in being aware that human trafficking has like 1,000 different faces. And, you know, a lot of the awareness ads and campaigns that we see target, shall we say, dramatized situations, sensationalized situations that get the attention, but they may not cover the 990 other ways that you can be trafficked, whether it be through employment or law office or places that you wouldn't necessarily expect, places that you might feel safe. So I just think, I mean, just like, I'm sure all of us who work at an organization, we get those yearly, phishing email trainings and all that kind of stuff. You just have to be constantly keeping up with what's going on, what could potentially be a trigger. You kind of have to, and I hate to say it, but, always be on guard and treat every situation as, is this a potentially dangerous situation?
I'll actually mirror off of that. When Marina started speaking, it reminded me of my day so busy I already forgot. Just last night, I had a friend request pop up on Facebook, somebody I don't know, but we had 8 mutual friends. I almost feel safe, right? Like we had 8 mutual friends. But for whatever reason, I decided to reach out to one of them and said, hey, do you know this person? Like is this from high school? Like, well, how do we know this person? They responded back and said, yeah, I don't even know how I'm this person's friend. The other 7, I made one message. You know how this is. I copied and pasted it to each one of them and said, none of them knew them except for one. And it was a female. But again, don't put a gender on anything. It was a female that sent me the friend request, and one of the mutual guy friends wrote back and said, oh my gosh, he said, I forgot she was even in my friends, was talking to her on Tinder, never went out with her, she was crazy, forgot. And I'm like, so is she just pecking along at like everybody's friends list and hitting it up? Needless to say, I declined and did not. But again, I don't have a story that goes beyond that other than just being vigilant. Here's somebody I don't know. 8 mutual friends kind of seems fake, seems like a safe space. But I took a moment to kind of verify who they were, and it was enough for me to decide that this is certainly not somebody that's a friend of mine or going to be a friend of mine. So it's events like this, and I'm actually probably focusing, but from any of you, what can educational institutions do more to help advise the community and generate more awareness for trafficking?
Well, for one, pay it forward. So you're getting a lot of information in this little amount of time that we have here today. Have those conversations. When you're out with your friends, talk about it. Let them know to be careful. If I, polled you guys, and I won't, but if I did, you probably know something like someone that this has happened to. I know when I do a lot of outreach within the school systems, usually I have several kids that come up to me and say, either this happened to me, this happened to someone I know. So really just having those conversations is so important, and really getting involved within the school, because whether it's maybe mentoring younger children, maybe it's within your own school system, starting clubs, anti-human trafficking clubs. We were doing really good with some of the clubs in the colleges prior to COVID, and then kind of like some things kind of scaled down, but we would really love to see some of the colleges bring those back and have anti-trafficking clubs and help with fundraising and bringing awareness on campus.
I would also just say breaking down the stigma. is really important. I can't tell you how many cases of individuals that I've researched or interviewed who did not self-identify as a victim because they felt a sense of culpability because they made that first mistake, it was on them, yada yada, so they didn't seek any assistance because they felt like it was their problem.
Actually, I have an initiative. We may work the two campuses together on. My mind's reeling over here already. So with that, I'm going to go through each panel member, ask you any closing statements we have, and then we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions that anybody might have. So.
I don't have anything in particular. I just thank you all for coming, and you know, it's because people show up that we're able to spread the awareness. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and just to echo that and echo what Marina said is you all now have a basic understanding of what human trafficking can look like in a first world country like America. And it's not always, as Laurie would say, it's not always like the movie Taken. You know, it's not the white van, it's not the kidnapper. Actually, the statistics tell us that your average trafficker is someone who already has a relationship with you before they traffic you. So it's someone you know. It's someone that these victims know because there's that grooming process like we talked about. So thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A because that's always the really fun part.
I did want to add on to the Facebook that Laurie was talking about. The newest thing happening on Facebook as well is people we know having their accounts stolen, and then you think you're still friends with them. And I actually found somebody who I was friends with on Facebook, who her whole Facebook page has been taken over by somebody else, who's out there scamming her friends for money, for things along those lines. So it's just random. Like, you'll start to see, I think that's the thing, if you start to see something going on with your friends or with somebody who's younger, like all of a sudden, if you're in school, right, and this girl has a brand new pair of $300 sneakers that she's never had before, it starts to think about the red flags that you need to have out there. And as well as the stigma of it, absolutely, you know, we need to understand that these things happen, and it could happen to any one of us, and we just have to be vigilant and stand up, and when it does, make sure we can report it and do what we need to do on that.
So, and actually, just to add to that, I can talk loud enough. I'm a speech professor. I can, project really well. Besides just their account, like their page being hacked, what happens is, how many of you ever get a friend request to somebody you're like, I'm already friends with them? Exactly. Right? Like, why is Aunt Janet sending me a friend's request? I'm already friends with her. And that's those duplications coming in where you're thinking, oh, they must have lost their account, or how silly they deleted it, and you go ahead and friend them, and those are two separate accounts, right? Aunt Janet still has her account, and somebody else now is mirroring it. So, sorry, go ahead, Marina.
Well, that kind of goes along with when you were saying what things to look for. Those multiple accounts. Now, you guys probably may have multiple accounts. You might have an Insta that you have for your friends and one that you have for parents, because we know kiddos like to do that. But that is one red flag that we do look at. We look at if they have multiple accounts, because that's usually, traffickers will have them create different accounts to use for clientele and different things of that nature. So that is one thing for you to look for, or really, even with your kids or with your friends. I have my kids' friends. They look at this kind of stuff. My son actually had a friend that was being trafficked, and that he went to school with, and that was one thing that I was like, well, look and see how many multiple accounts they have. Let's look at that. Let's dig deep. And it's not hard to do. You guys probably could all do that. You could be little detectives and figure out some of that stuff. So that is another red flag to look for. And like you said, having items you cannot afford, whether it's substance abuse, if your friends are using substances and they have no means to support that, huge red flag. How are they paying for it? Drug dealers do not give drugs for free. Believe you me. So how are they supporting it? They have other items, expensive clothing, getting their nails, their hair done, going to the barber shop, getting new shoes, what have you. No means to support it. Huge red flag. Now, could they be robbing someone, burglarizing, scamming, doing other things? Absolutely. But usually there could be some manipulation, vulnerability, sextortion going on, sexual online exploitation, or human trafficking.
And like she said, you just add that to the list, right? Because a trafficker is going to, if you had a business, you will take care of your product, right? So, their hair, their nails, lash extensions, we've talked about, all of those things. I'm going to open it up for questions, but I always like to add this since it was also brought up about you have the knowledge. I love the quote by abolitionist William Wilberforce, if you know, and it is, you can choose to look the other way, but you can never again say you didn't know. So what you do with the information you get today is entirely up to you. So any questions for any of our panelists? Okay, I'm going to hand you the mic.
Well, Dr. Allen, Nicole, Cheri, and Marina, I have a question for all of you. Do you guys offer like internship for someone who's, I'm going to college for a psychology major, and my goal is to be a drug and alcohol therapist for, you know, women and children who have went through similar things that I have experienced in my life, and I'm just, you know, want to make a change and a difference because of what I endured, and I was just wondering, I would love to be a part of something like that. And do y'all offer, you know, internship for somebody who would want to intern through you guys' programs?
You're all looking at me.
I was about to say, we have the Human Trafficking Task Force here. Laurie, I don't know if you've already talked about that or not.
No, so
okay.
3 of us on this, 4 of us on this panel, and hopefully soon to be all on the panels,
Are part of the 14th Circuit Human Trafficking Task Force. So we fall under the State Attorney General as the way that it filters down. As far as individual agencies, I can absolutely give you information on some that, you know, that take internships. We have our first, she's sitting right over here, our first intern, and she is one of our students over at Florida State University that's doing an internship this semester with the task force as a whole. But there are certainly some organizations that can, you know, if you have a very specific that you're looking for, that I think all of us could probably give you some.
Hours to complete your degree?
I'm pretty sure, but even
then, I would just want to be a part of it in general. And you look very familiar to me, and now I know why, because I went on the site about Lavish Ministries, because I'm also a realtor with CPAR, and y'all had an opening. And I was invited to go to your opening in Lynn Haven, and I got the days and times mixed up, and I had a showing to go to, so I missed it, and I was so upset about that. But I did go on your site, and I read all about you and about how it started with you, and I was just amazed about that. And so I went and I tried to, you know, put in but y'all weren't accepting any at the moment. Thank you.
So both me and Nicole at different type of events were doing trainings last year for CPAR because they had taken human trafficking on as sort of their educational mantle for the year. Any other questions? Oh, come on, you got to have some questions. Was it really that comprehensive that nobody has any? Okay.
Y'all mentioned that it was very difficult to prosecute human trafficking. Did you share, did I miss it? Did you share why that is? Why is it such a challenge?
Back to Marina.
There's multiple factors with that. Sometimes you don't have a cooperative victim, and sometimes that can be quite difficult. We do try to prosecute cases without the victim testimony, and that's one thing that we really look at, that digital footprint. These investigations also take time. So it's not that they're not investigating it. It's just I've worked with investigation. I've been in this field for 22 years, so I've been doing this quite some time. And sometimes these investigations take, 1 to 2 years to go through. And if you're talking about fully through prosecution to sentencing, it could be much longer than that. And then if you're looking at federal cases, it could be 5+ years. So it does take a long time to prosecute. And especially because you're looking at a lot of these cases might have multiple victims, so there's a lot of investigating that has to go into making the connections, especially if you're going to take it on a federal level. Again, the traffickers could be in another country, or they could be traveling from state to state and committing multiple crimes while they're traveling. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just, if a patrol officer shows up at a burglary to a residence, they stay at that residence and they process that scene, right? It's very, very different when it comes to trafficking.
Also, just to add on to that, with trafficking, part of the crux of it is the force, fraud, or coercion aspect. And so I work with a lot of lawyers, and a lot of times that just is too much of a barrier, right? How do you prove coercion, right? At what point have you reached the threshold that you've gone from voluntary to involuntary? And so for a lot of times, if there's something else they can prosecute that's easier to win, they'll go that route. Because, like, you know, kind of like what you were talking about, like, is it trafficking if, you know, she took his number on aisle 4, right? At what point did she lose control? And because that's so hard, you know, it just makes it difficult.
Just want to remind, in the state of Florida, and really now throughout the United States, if it's a minor, someone under the age of 18, you do not have to prove force, fraud, and coercion. So that's another reason why minor cases are easier to prosecute, because you don't have to prove that element. But I think with the training of law enforcement, so in the state of Florida, law enforcement has to have a minimum of 4 hours of training in human trafficking. And I think we actually just worked with FDLE to revamp their training and their advanced investigators training as well. Because honestly, cases that I've worked, and I know Nicole can probably, I'm on her soapbox right now, it's not that difficult to prove. Did you withhold drugs? That's coercion. Did you say, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to hurt you, or I'm going to hurt your child? That's all it takes, that in itself. Getting a federal element, sometimes as easy as, was condoms used? There's no condoms that's produced in the state of Florida. There's no cell phone pieces that are produced in the state of Florida. So you can get a federal nexus if there was a device that was used to transfer photos from one device to another, or if condoms was used in the trafficking occurrence. So there's ways that we can go about and finding those ways to prosecute. But again, you're right, it is a barrier, but at the same time, with those minor cases, it's definitely easier to prove because you don't have to have that element.
And I would add to that, you've heard it said a couple of times today, but to really sort of enforce that most victims don't identify as victims, right? It's my mistake. This is what I'm good for. Kind of, this is my lot in life. This is where I'm ending up, right? They don't identify because we identify. That's why we talk. I would say I love Liam Neeson as much as the next person, and Taken was a great movie, but it is 1% of trafficking, right? We identify trafficking as shackled, chained in the basement, unable to go anywhere, and not somebody that's walking around freely with a cell phone in their hand that can call. And then to just mirror off of some of that as well, when we talk about adults, prostitution is illegal. So when we get into somebody being a victim, we're looking at what's called victim provocation, right? It's kind of that forced coercion, right, into that criminal act, and then even taking it to the next level. And when we talk more about human trafficking, we would have brought this up, but what's called a bottom, you know, a bottom is a pimp's best girl, right? And she is running the business for him now, and she's taking the girls on the jobs and showing them what to do and bringing daddy home the money and all of those things. She is a trafficker, but she's also a victim. And so that falls under victim provocation. So just sort of probably more information than you needed, but just adding some details there. Oh, see, and wait, why don't you tell them your book then real quick? Here you go.
Yeah, so I did a study, actually. This one's in the Northern Triangle, so it doesn't work here so much. The Northern Triangle, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. But I looked at this element of coercion and coercing individuals into criminality themselves as victims of human trafficking, but also as criminals. And then we end up with all sorts of issues of, like, you know, police coming and arresting them as criminals, but not seeing them as victims, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's, you know, it happens everywhere. I just happen to be a Latin Americanist. But yeah, as far as the gangs are concerned, you know, they are exploiting the fact that if they can just get those people to commit a crime, now they're criminals, and they have that to hang over them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yep.
We could go on for days, but we only have a couple of minutes left. So any other questions from anybody? Any clarifications, interests? Okay.
What was the website that you can go to help your kids know what to look for?
Thorn is a really good website.
Right.
And we can put that out. So we have a human trafficking task force Facebook page as well, if y'all would like to follow us on that. And we can put the link there, but it's to Thorn, THORN. And it's called, the free guide is called Safe Connections, a guide to protecting your child from online grooming. And so it walks through all of the things like how the stages of grooming, all of that within there.
And the other one was NetSmarts, NETSMARTZ, and they can go in and play online games on that platform, but it's also obviously teaching them safety, but it's more of a hands-on.
And just to give you some other resources, this is just ever so slightly outdated, but not by too much, okay? These are 21 apps, especially if you have children to be aware of. You'd probably see them on their phones. You know, there's cover apps, right? Like you see at the bottom here, the little calculator. If you looked at your kid's phone, you saw a calculator, like, oh, gee, they're actually paying attention in math class. And it's actually a cover app for them to hide other social media accounts that they have. We have those over there. I wasn't able to make a copy of this, but if any of you know our chief of police on the beach, J.R. Telementes, not that Sheriff Ford, not that Captain Smith don't do lots and lots, but I mean, he really hones in on sextortion and online predators. He does a great presentation called Parents Against Predators at a lot of the high schools around here. You're welcome to kind of look through this. I wasn't able to make copies of this, but it has more updated websites like Meet Me and all those on there. And he talks about how easily, you know, your children have access to pornographic material every single day, probably while sitting in their classroom. So, and then there's some other things, and if you actually have kids, these are all different anti-trafficking organizations, right, that put these things out. But, you know, if you have them, here's a contract that you could have your kids, you know, and if nothing else, I get it, they're signing it, but they're talking points, right? It's those conversations and actually knowing, you know, as JR puts it, be the parent, not the friend, right? So, and I know a lot of you, you know, again, I teach the demographic that's sitting here, right? You know, you're probably like, I would have killed my parents if they tried to take my cell phone in high school or something like that. But, you know, we've gotten to that point where if you're not vigilant over your children, somebody else will be, okay? So, sure.
So I do want to give Lavish Ministries and our local law enforcement some props. There is a great 3-part human trafficking series that you can get on YouTube. It was from WJHG, but it's about how human trafficking is happening here locally, so it's a really great thing. And then do you want to give the announcement of what's going to happen at Redfish?
That reminded me. So in 2023, so we have a survivor of trafficking who's on our staff. Her name is Kendra. And some of you may have heard her story before. We're always walking around, and not walking around, but we're always asked to speak at places. So some people have heard her story, but we actually were able to partner with a production company called 3-Part Films, and we filmed a 15-minute short film that is Kendra's story. It's the story of the first time she was trafficked. What makes her story unique, a few things make her story unique. Number one, she was a pastor's daughter, grew up in the suburbs. Her parents to this day have been married for 35 years. She grew up with 2 older sisters and a dog. Very, very great upbringing. No vulnerabilities in the sense of she didn't grow up on the wrong side of the tracks. She you know, didn't grow up in a single parent household or any of those issues that you would sometimes assume that someone would grow up in if they were a victim of trafficking. No, it was suburbs, parents have been married forever, great home. But she ended up getting involved with some not so great kids at a church camp. And that's kind of where the whole story starts. She ended up running away to Florida, and her first trafficking occurrence occurred in Destin. She was a barista at a coffee shop in the Destin Commons. She was 17, and that's when her trafficker first approached her as a loving, caring 30-year-old man who started grooming her, bringing her roses to work, bringing her a large pizza because he thought that she hadn't eaten all day because she was working at the coffee shop, and just started pursuing her. And one day it all changed. So on our YouTube channel, the Lavish Ministries YouTube channel, you can actually watch that 15-minute film. In addition, in April, downtown here, there's going to be a film festival called the Redfish Film Festival. It's the first time they're ever doing this. And that film was actually chosen to be one of the films featured at that film festival. So if you end up getting a ticket to attend the Redfish Film Festival, you'll be able to see and screen that film there as well.
We're excited for this. Any other questions? And I think I've pretty much taken you almost right up to the minute here. But does anybody have any questions at all? If not, we're here. Feel free to come up to us afterwards, talk to us. Over there, if you're interested, if you want more information, you can sign up. Some of you are signing up as if it was a sign-in sheet when you came in as a student, but it's over there. And if anybody's interested, every quarter we have a general human trafficking task force meeting. The next one is April 18th. It's 11 o'clock. It's over at the Gulf Coast Child Advocacy Center. You're welcome to come, participate if you want to be a part of any of the subcommittees or outreach in the area. So thank you so much again for having us. I love being here every year.